Hello, I'm Bruce DuPuy. Coming up, 10 years after Katrina slammed the Gulf Coast, how is the region recovering? What did emergency management leaders learn from one of the most botched disasters in history? And what work remains? We're on the ground in New Orleans on this 10th anniversary of the Nightmare Storm and its aftermath.
From News Channel 8, this is News Talk with Bruce DuPuy.
Welcome in on this Friday. Hi, everybody. Great to have you with us today. We have such a fantastic lineup for you. We'll get to our in-depth coverage of the Gulf Coast's recovery from Katrina in just a few moments. First, though, a program note. Starting on Monday, News Talk will air at 11 a.m. We are trading places with our friends from Let's Talk Live. That show moves to 10. I hope you will look for us at 11 a.m. We'll be looking for you. Now to our first topic, the president's push to get Congress to approve the deal that the U.S. and other nations negotiated with Iran regarding that country's nuclear program. National political reporter Scott Thuman joins us now from our Capitol Hill bureau. Scott, it's always great to have you with us today.
Thank you, Bruce.
You were there when our colleague Maureen Bunyan interviewed President Obama this week. Is the White House tailoring these one-on-one sessions with an eye toward some of the individual lawmakers they're hoping to sway?
Oh, absolutely, and that's the only reason that we believe we were one of 5 cities where the president granted these interviews. He was targeting lawmakers in those districts, in that viewership area, who are undecided and have a lot of sway and power, in our case being Senator Ben Cardin of Maryland, who is, of course, the ranking member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. He has yet to say exactly how he's going to vote on this measure. He's waiting until after Labor Day. And so the president and the White House hitting key demographics where they hope they would get their message relayed greater audience-wise, so that that audience would then pressure the lawmaker to go ahead with this deal.
You and I had what I regarded, and you probably did too, to be a fascinating opportunity to sit down off air with Maryland Senator Ben Cardin, who you've referenced, and it was clear to me, one of the several takeaways. One, this is a big decision. It's a difficult one, and Senator Cardin pretty much told us he's making a list. I'm not sure if it's on paper, it may be in his mind, but the pros on one side, the cons on the other, and there are, it's a full list on each side, fair to say.
It is, and I think it was interesting because one of the things that you'll recall, Bruce, that Senator Cardin pointed out is he had some concerns, as do other legislators, including on the other side of the aisle, like Senator Bob Corker of Tennessee, the Republican, over this idea of what he said aren't secret but are confidential negotiations. In other words, these sort of side agreements that take place between the IAEA and Iran. Now, those involved in the process are aware of what's in these, but members of Congress aren't able to see this paperwork directly, so they have to rely on briefings. He's asking to see those papers. Other lawmakers are as well. And that's a legitimate concern. Now, when I was at the White House on Wednesday, I also had a meeting with Ben Rhodes and with Wendy Sherman, 2 people who are heavily involved in this. Wendy Sherman, for example, actually helped orchestrate and write up this deal. What's interesting is they feel very confident that despite those concerns by Senator Cardin and Corker and others, that once they get all the briefings that they need, they will be 100% on board with this. Now, maybe there's some feigned optimism in there, but for the most part, they seem quite confident. They point out, look, there are only 2 Senate Democrats who have said assuredly, that they will not vote for this, Chuck Schumer being the biggest name. So there was a pretty significant sense of optimism that despite those concerns, despite the pros and cons lists that you point out, that this won't go their way in the end, even if they lose a majority vote, Bruce, because keep in mind, Congress could vote by a majority in House and Senate to say, we don't approve of this deal, we're trying to scrap it. The president would then veto it. They'd have to come up with 2/3 majority. That's a very difficult thing to do.
Are there undecided Democrats looking to Ben Cardin to see where he comes down?
You know, there's so many articles, write-ups, editorials, interviews saying that. Ben Cardin denies that. Senator Cardin said, oh, maybe there were 2 or 3, and that could be exaggerating. However, obviously people are looking to him because they believe he will be the most well-briefed on this issue, because he has perhaps one of the best pipelines to the administration over this right now. There are constant conversations between the administration as well as the president and Ben Cardin. And on top of it, he's Jewish, he's a Democrat, he's the Senate Foreign Relations Ranking Committee member. I mean, there are a lot of reasons that people who don't feel as well versed on this subject are going to look to him, look to his vote, and then perhaps follow it. He downplays it, but it's out there for a reason.
I get the sense, and call me naive if I'm being naive, I get the sense that this is one of those decisions, this is one of those votes where lawmakers are going to hit it pretty much on the merits. It's hard to imagine the president getting particularly far with a partisan thing. This is something we Democrats need to do, or this is something I need from a legacy perspective. And since we're both Democrats, and this probably goes for Tim Kaine and others who have a vote upcoming on this pact, on this agreement.
Sure.
I would think, and maybe I would hope, that up or down, like it or hate it, wherever you end up, wherever you are, this is one where it's based on the merits, as opposed to other considerations.
Yeah,
Again,
you would like to hope that, and perhaps
that's naive, say so.
It's not naive of you by any stretch. I think that it's kind of just very hopeful that there's a different level of understanding on how these things work, because we'd like it to be that way. But look, it's a very complex issue. You've got all of the influence from Israel on this issue. Benjamin Netanyahu has been one of its staunchest critics, and of course he is pressuring lawmakers back here in the United States, reaching out to them from overseas, saying don't approve this vote. So you have that. You've got a very strong Israeli contingency within the United States that is pressuring some of these lawmakers not to agree. That's perhaps what got to Chuck Schumer up in New York. But, you know, the president and the White House would not be pushing this one so much if they didn't realize it is a tough battle. There's a lot of arm twisting, and the president told us that. I was in the room with him when he started discussing that, because he admitted that it is going to be a challenge on a lot of levels. Now, he tried to downplay it, saying we'll have an easier time passing this than the Affordable Care Act, than Obamacare. But what I pointed out, and I spoke to Josh Earnest, the press secretary, about this, what's different about this versus that vote is, if you recall, during the health care battle, you had a lot of very enthusiastic allies on the president's side, on the administrative side, who were pushing their colleagues to approve it. So you had a bunch of cheerleaders on the Hill who were already doing a lot of the president's work. Here, I feel that he's having to do a lot more of it himself. A lot of the phone calls he's doing from the Oval Office are kind of going at it alone. Now, I brought that up to Josh Earnest. He said, well, look, Harry Reid issued a statement over the weekend. Senator Nancy Pelosi has been in favor of it. But you don't see these rallies. You don't see them making grandiose statements. An email or a statement from Harry Reid's office is much different than coming out before the cameras and saying, we need the Affordable Care Act. They're not doing this with the Iran deal as much as you think. So I think the White House realizes it's in for a little bit more of a battle. Their saving grace is that they've got that power for a rare veto, and it's very difficult to come up with that two-thirds majority to override the president. Scott Thuman from our Capitol Hill Bureau. Always great having you, Scott, and I know you and I will be talking about this issue again in the days to come, particularly after Labor Day. Thank you very much for your time. We'll take a quick break here. When we return, the Gulf Coast, 10 years after being battered by Katrina.